This video are going to explain the case of Nicaragua versus USA. As the full name of the case is Case Concerning the Military and Paramilitary Activities in and Against Nicaragua, also known as Nicaragua versus US, it was held by International Court of Justice ICJ, and the citation for this case is 1986 ICJ 14. It's already decided on 27 June 1986. The judges are Nagendra Singh and Guy Ledrick Day. The attribution and the use of force are included for the substantive legal issue arising in this case. It due to US had violated international law by supporting the Contras in their rebellion against Sandinistas and by mining Nicaraguan harbor. The favor are most likely to go to Nicaragua and against US, coming with the awarding of reparations to Nicaragua. The court have 15 final decisions upon which it voted. The court found its verdict that US do violate in breach of its obligation under customary international law not to use force against another state. The court stated that US encouraged human rights violation by aiding the Contras. US refused to take part in the proceedings. US also argued that ICJ lacked jurisdiction to hear the case and US do block the enforcement of the judgment by UNC, United Nations Security Council, and it prevented Nicaragua to obtain any compensation. The armed intervention by US first occurred under President Taft. He ordered the overthrow of Nicaraguan President Jose Santos Zelaya in 1909. In 1912, a contingent of U.S. Marine landed at the port of Corinto and occupied Leon and Granada. A pro-U.S. government was formed, Augusto Cesar Sandino, against both the U.S. occupation and the Nicaraguan establishment in 1927. Then, Marines withdrew and left the Nicaraguan National Guard. Then head of National Guard, Anastasio Somoza Garcia, ordered his forces to capture and murder Sandino. In 1937, Somoza expected the presidency and established a dictatorship until 1979, but the regime collapsed. A lot of moderate supporters of dictatorship began abandoning it and had the revolutionary sentiment increase. The Sandinista FLSN movement started to expand its influence and expect the leadership of the revolutions. US opposed the socialist FSLN. That's it from me. The rest of the topic will be explained by the next member.
The International Court of Justice is the primary judicial arm of the United Nations, or the UN, and exists to resolve legal disputes among UN member states. In 1986, the court issued one of its most consequential decisions, military and paramilitary activities in and against Nicaragua, also known as Nicaragua versus United States, addressing covert United States activities in Nicaragua. In 1979, the Nicaraguan government of President Anastasio Somoza fell to a popular uprising led by the Sandinista, who installed a new government. Almost immediately, armed resistance to this new government arose. The US abandoned its initial support to the Nicaraguan opposition, known as the Contras. In 1983 and 1984, US military personnel mined Nicaraguan harbors and carried out attacks on Nicaraguan facilities. In 1984, Nicaraguan filed suit against the US in the International Court of Justice, claiming that the US had violated both the UN Charter and principles of customary international law. Nicaragua asked that the US be ordered to cease its operation in the country and pay reparations. The judgment rendered on the merits and motivated in 142 pages is a perilous and rather fascinating exercise of balance and cautious subtlety. The operative part has 16 points, decided by 11 votes to 4 or, for the most part, 12 to 3 to 14 to 1. In its drafting, it reflects the difficult but not impossible coherence of a court formed of juries as diverse in their cultures, their temperaments, their formations, and their ideologies. The result is a clear condemnation of US actions in Central America. On 9 April 1984, the ambassador of the Republic of Nicaragua to the Netherlands filed in the registry of the court an application instituting proceedings against the United States of America in respect of a dispute concerning responsibility for military and paramilitary activities in and against Nicaragua. In order to found the jurisdiction of the court, the application relied on declarations made by the parties accepting the compulsory jurisdiction of the court under Article 36 of its statute.
There are different issues that needs to be discussed from the case. First is whether the jurisdiction to entertain a dispute between two states, if they both accepted the court's jurisdiction, is within the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice. So the International Court of Justice hold that the jurisdiction of the dispute between two states, if each of the states accepted the court's jurisdiction, is within the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice. Even though Nicaragua Declaration of 1929 was not deposited with the Permanent Court because of the potential effect it had that it would last for many years, it remains valid. It maintained its effect when Nicaragua became a party to the statute of the International Court of Justice because the declaration was made unconditionally and was valid for an unlimited period. In regards to that, when Nicaragua accepted the statute, this is considered that the plaintiff had given its consent to the transfer of its declaration to the International Court of Justice. The second issue is what is the relationship between treaty and customary international law. The International Court of Justice examined that the relationship of treaty and customary law, which is first where the customary principles were identical to treaty provisions. Next is where there were different rights or obligations under customary and treaty law in the same subject matter. The third issue is whether the application of such a state to the International Court of Justice is admissible where there are no ground exists to exclude the application of a state. The application of such a state to the International Court of Justice is admissible. So the 5 grounds upon which the United States challenged the admissibility of Nicaragua's application were that the plaintiff failed because there is no indispensable parties. Rule when there is no necessary parties were brought forth. Nicaragua's request of the court to consider the possibility of a threat to peace, which is the exclusive province of the Security Council, failed due to the fact that International Court of Justice can exercise jurisdiction which is concurrent with that of the Security Council, that the International Court of Justice is unable to deal with situations involving ongoing armed conflict.
Customary law and the Treaty of Friendship, Commerce and Navigation, based on Article 36, Paragraph 2 of the statute, all parties to the treaty that affected by the decision are parties to the case before the court, or the United States of America agree to the jurisdiction. To examine whether its jurisdiction was limited by the effect of reservation, the court has to ascertain whether any third parties to the 4 multilateral treaties invoked by Nicaragua and no parties to the proceeding would be affected by the judgment. The case of El Salvador, that the U.S. claims to be exercising the right collective self-defense, which is regarded as a justification of its own conduct to Nicaragua. The right then being endorsed by United Nations Charter Article 51 and OAS Charter Article 21. This dispute happened to be disputes arising under multilateral treaties, to which U.S., Nicaragua, and El Salvador are parties. And therefore, the court confirmed that El Salvador would be affected by the court's decision in the collective self-defense matter. In addition, Nicaragua has claimed that the U.S. has an affair about the OAS Charter Article 18. And therefore, it is impossible for the court to agree that El Salvador was not affected at all. Based on the explanation above, the court then concluded that the U.S. cannot claim to be exercising collective self-defense. The court indeed reached a conclusion where it had to apply the multilateral reservation in the U.S. declaration, without the effect to other treaties from other sources as in the Article 38 of the statute. Although the treaty law and customary law have the same content, both laws are being applied separately, as the customary law exists independently from the treaty law. The court does not consider if any available customary law which has similar content with the treaties cannot be applied by the virtue of the United States reservation. Both the treaty provision and customary law have its own right and obligation for the dispute or subject matter. Therefore, both the treaty between U.S. and Nicaragua and the customary law were applied for the dispute that arose between them. Dicta. During the establishment law regarding U.S. intervention to Nicaragua government, the court recalled that the provision of humanitarian assistance should be limited to the practice of the Red Cross. This is because if the provision aimed to escape condemnation as an intervention to another state's internal affair, it should not be anything involving discrimination, as U.S. activities that supporting the Contras military and paramilitary have already been upheld as a breach in the principle of non-intervention. The humanitarian assistance that court have mentioned considered as dictum in this case.
In the view of dissenting this case, Judge Schwebel argued that the Sandinistas government achieved international recognitions and received large amounts of foreign aid in exchange for commitments they subsequently violated. He cited the evidence that Sandinista government had indeed supported the rebels in El Salvador and noted that Nicaragua's own CIA witness contradicted their assertions that they had never supported the rebels in El Salvador. The CIA witness said that there was no evidence of weapons shipments since early 1981, but Schwebel argued that he could not credibly explain why opponents of Contra aid such as Congressman Poland, who also saw the evidence, believed that weapons shipments were ongoing. He further argued that Daniel Ortega publicly admitted such shipments in statements in 1985 and 1986. Furthermore, there was no dispute that the leadership of rebels operated in Nicaragua from time to time. These proposals were rejected by the Sandinistas, and Judge Schwebel argued that the U.S. was entitled to take action in collective self-defense with El Salvador by authorizing Contra aid in December 1981. He stated that further U.S. proposals to resolve this issue made in early 1982 were also ignored by the Sandinistas. The judge said that both sides of the wars in Nicaragua and El Salvador had committed atrocities. He said the U.S. mining of Nicaraguan harbors was unlawful in regard to third party, but not in Nicaragua. From the parties' interpretations, Professor of International Law Anthony D'Amato commented on this case, stating that the law will collapse if defendants could only be sued when they agree to be sued, and the proper measurement of that collapse would be not just the drastically diminished number of cases, but also the necessary restructuring of a vast system of legal transaction and relations predicted on the availability of courts as the last resort. There will be talk of return to the law of the jungle. A month after the announcement withdrawal, Secretary of State Scholz suggested the President Reagan later confirmed in a press conference that the goal of U.S. policy was to overthrow the Sandinista government of Nicaragua.
Based on the analysis that we made concerning the United States military and paramilitary activities against Nicaragua, I do appreciate the court rulings that based on the United States activities that abide obligations under peremptory norm of general international law, it was bound to respect Nicaragua's sovereignty without use of force or threat against the Nicaragua.